Welcome to the I Work For Him podcast. I'm Michael Miracle, producer of the I Work For Him radio program, the voice of the faith and work movement. Our mission is to transform the workplace of every Christian into a mission field. What does that look like in your workplace? Let's find out right now.
You've tuned into I Work For Him, the mouthpiece for the faith and work movement. We're your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg.
Thanks for joining us today, everybody. I just want to remind you about the Awaken Podcast Network. That's a place where you can go and find podcasts speaking into all different aspects of your work from a biblical perspective. So Awaken Podcast Network can be found at awakenpodcastnetwork.com.
You know, every one of us listening today has had certain moments in our lives that have etched into our memories. Moments where life came to an intersection and we took a turn and never went back. For James Barnett, it was a lifetime of moments like these that inspired him to write his book, Blue Skies. Through a lifetime of adventures, James Barnett learned how to live in extraordinary expectation of what's around the corner and recognizing the impact that the last corner made on his life. James Barnett is the president of DaySpring, a division of Hallmark, where he started 41 years ago as a marketing intern. He and his wife, Marilyn, live in Arkansas, where they have 3 grown children and at least 5 grandchildren. James Barnett is here to talk faith, work, and blue skies right here on I Work For Him as we're on location at DaySpring, online at dayspring.com. James Barnett, welcome to I Work For Him.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I'm excited about time to share today.
Well, I'm just excited about your book. It was so fun to read the stories in your book and to experience your life in your book. And I don't get a chance to do that because a lot of times people write a book about a topic. Mm-hmm. You wrote a book about your life. James, your job and your job title comes with some notoriety. How do you keep your heart Jesus-focused and your priorities in proper order with God, family, and then work?
Well, first of all, if you have a family, you find out that you're not in charge all the time. You know, you've got a lot of help around, but, really balancing, what God is up to all the time. I've lived long enough that when you have enough failure in life, that gives you new perspective. And it gives you like, hey, I don't have all the answers. And so as I think about my family and I think about my work, I just really work about it's not about me. It's about what is God up to. And I work at practicing, every day, getting the right perspective.
So you didn't always have those things in the right order, did you?
Not at all. Not at all.
So, and that's what your book is really all about. Mm-hmm. So what did you grow up understanding?
Mm-hmm. Well, I grew up in a Christian home and wonderful parents, but I'm youngest of 7. So, my siblings will tell me that they raised me, my sisters especially. I had 2 sisters and 4 brothers. And we were, just a typical family. We didn't have a lot. My dad was a pastor of small churches and a school teacher. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And not only did we have the 7 of us, but we seemed to have 2 or 3 other people living with us all the time. But they just continued to pour into us and to give us perspective about life. And we were just poor folks from Arkansas that really tried to keep that perspective. So as I really began to grow and understand in that Christian home, made a profession of faith when I was 8 years old, and didn't have this exciting story, you could say, of what I would say, making choices that maybe were harmful, those kind of things. I was just a kid that loved the Lord and wanted to do good things.
So let's start digging into your lifetime. And I expect that over this podcast and the next that we'll capture a lot of this. But I want to start with your work life as it started off really early. Uncle Irvy. How did Uncle Irvy teach you the value of hard work and generosity?
Oh, so much. My Uncle Irvy had a dairyette. And so he had only one daughter. And so us boys were needing to work all the time. We needed to make a little money, and we always were hungry, it seemed like. And as a kid, he not only had donuts, but in the morning he had donuts, but then he had, hamburgers and Cokes and ice cream and things that we really liked. So we would sort of get up there and look around and talk to Uncle Irvy, and he would always find work for us to do so that we could maybe experience some of those hamburgers and French fries. And, we never went in, for some reason, I think we were taught this from our parents, but we never went in and asked for anything. We just went in and said, how can we help? What can we do? And Uncle Irvy would always find work for us. And, he didn't have a lot either, and so he was working hard, but he would always find work for us. And we would come back in from cleaning the parking lot or, helping others outside, doing some things. He would always seem to have a hamburger and a French fries and a milkshake there ready for us, and just wouldn't even say anything. It would just be sitting there, and you knew it was for you. So he was always generous with us and always caring. Even though that he didn't have a lot, we didn't have a lot, he was always looking for ways to bless others. And I saw him do it time and time again with people throughout his entire life.
And how good were his donuts?
Oh, they melted in your mouth. Krispy Kreme doesn't have anything on Uncle Irvy. He had an old machine that those things every morning. He was up there at 4:30 in the morning. By 6 o'clock, there were fresh donuts, glazed donuts, cherry-covered donuts, chocolate. There were just unbelievable flavors that he would put on those.
Getting kind of hungry, right? You're speaking Jim's love language right there.
And I run into people
from carrying that business. I mean, where's the Dairyette today?
Oh, it's still there. The Dairyette is still there. They just celebrated their 65th anniversary.
Does it stay in the family?
It's not in the family. It hasn't been in the family for about 20 years. But the folks still use the name Barnett's Dairyette, and they don't have the donuts anymore. Running that machine was, I guess, a difficult thing. Irvy could fix anything, so if anything broke down. But they still have hamburgers, French fries, and milkshakes that are terrific.
You were talking about your uncle and how he modeled a lot of things for you. And, what an amazing way to learn things when they're being modeled. And you then referenced back to your parents a little bit. So let's talk about them, because they were really a lot of the inspiration in your life. Tell us about them.
Well, they were raised, my dad said we were raised backward, bashful, and poor. I remember him making that phrase. And he and Mom grew up north of Siloam Springs, Arkansas, about 4 miles out in the country, and they were farmers and had orchards and things like that. But, since I came along, my parents were in their late 30s when I was born, and they really just instilled in us just the love of Jesus all the time. They worked hard. They, again, didn't have a lot, so we were always, busy, and Dad was teaching school. We had a garden, a big garden, and my mom canned everything that we could make it through the winter on, and so they were always just providing that love and care for us. And so we just knew that as a normal thing. There was never something that we didn't think we could do. Our parents believed in us. Mom would always just be as proud of us as any other kid, and would always tell us we could do anything and just to stay in the game.
So you've been in Siloam Springs your entire life?
My entire life, except one semester I went to Baylor, my first semester, and was down there. And then I'm coming back and going to John Brown University because my dad had got a job there and I could go to school for free. And so that was a great deal.
Wow, I love that. We're talking today with James Barnett, the president of DaySpring, online, DaySpring.com. We're talking about his brand new book, Blue Skies. You got to get a copy of this. DaySpring.com, great place for you to get a copy of it. And we got lots more with James Barnett coming right up. You listen to I Work for Him. We'll be right back.
You know the kind of person that always tells you about the latest trends or the special deals around town? Well, lean in, because here's a message from that kind of person. The Awaken Podcast Network is the place to be. Go to awakenpodcastnetwork.com and unlock God's purpose for your work with help from some friends. You will find a gathering place of podcasts that provide simple tools, faith stories, and conversations that will inspire and equip you to vibrantly live out your faith in your work today. Go ahead, check out awakenpodcastnetwork.com and then be that kind of person and tell a friend.
Hey, welcome back to I Work for Him, as we're on location today at DaySpring, Martha, right here in Siloam Springs, Arkansas, with the president of DaySpring, James Barnett. He's written a brand new book, Blue Skies, How to Live It in Extraordinary Expectations of What's Around the Corner. And we'll talk about what Blue Skies is all about, probably on the final podcast about, as our time closes with James Barnett next week. James, you learned about leadership from your mom and dad. How did your dad ignite the spark to lead?
Well, we didn't do a lot of traveling when I was a kid. We were, again, small town Arkansas, but there was a trip we took when I was 4 years old and when I was 11 years old. And those trips just opened me for adventure. We were gone 3 weeks on those trips, big family car, piling 8 or 9 kids and people in the car, and so it was quite a trip.
You said it was a big Buick. So were any of them in the trunk?
No, we were in the back window and the floor, and those were the days when you could sit 4 across the front and 5 across the back and be comfortable. It was a big old car. And so that was really a big deal. But my dad, and my mom both were they believed in people. They supported people. And Dad always, told us we could do anything we wanted to do. And he was always cheering us on. My older brothers and myself, we're all pretty good athletes. And so we were engaged in sports, and my sisters were involved in things. And so Dad was always encouraging us to step out and lead and to live out our faith and our work and our life. It was just all integrated together. So as I grew up, I had that as an example, and it was always an encouragement to me. And then God always, wires us with certain DNA and certain personalities. And so, but we were all, while we were different as kids, we all really believed that we could do something even beyond, where we were.
On your first road trip, you just really described the awe of being on a road trip in a motel pool for the very first time. Right. But in the second road trip, a lot of your siblings were grown and gone.
Yes.
And so your dad gave you a very special privilege on that trip.
He did. He really. I loved maps, and I loved being able to help guide and be the navigator. And so Dad started letting me sit up front and be his navigator and making sure and telling him where to go and what roads. And again, we didn't have GPS and cell phones and all those things. We had those paper maps, and we'd have them out, and every once in a while we'd miss a turn, and we did that. My dad was never upset about that. He'd say, hey, we'll circle back, we'll get back to that. So he really gave me the opportunity to learn and to succeed and to fail, and then encourage me to stay in the game with him and to not give up. And he was always, where I got that spirit of adventure from was my dad. He was always excited about the next thing. Well, we're going to the next city, and we're going to the next national park, the next thing we were going to go do. He was always excited and trying to get us excited. And he was always competing with us. If we were on a hike, he'd want to race. If we were picking blackberries, he'd give us each a quart, and he'd take a gallon, and he'd say, I can beat you to fill this thing up. And so we were raised with that competitive and fun. Everything was a big game. He loved having fun.
I love hearing that. I want to just interject right here, because I think that the listeners might be curious why we're talking about road trips. So can you make the connection with how that plays into the book that you've just written, Blue Skies?
Yes. Well, the Blue Skies is really the story of how to get perspective, how do you see God at work? God is always working, but you have to look again. You don't always get that right perspective. And what I did in this book is tried to really paint the picture of seeing God at work all the time, and through the national park trips that we took as a family. So when I was just after 30 years old, I decided to take trips to all the national parks.
Just save that, because I don't want to cover it. I want to cover all your trips, but that's where it came from. This is all about your trips, which is why I wanted, like your road trip at 11, it was not a small road trip that your dad gave you the map for. Where did you go? From Arkansas to where?
We covered the East Coast. Basically, we went across to Tennessee. We spent 3 weeks.
Tennessee, is not on the East Coast. I know from Arkansas, that's a long way.
Tennessee. Heading east.
Heading east, Tennessee. And we went all the way to Washington, D.C., and then we went up to New York City, up to Boston, and then up into New Hampshire and Vermont. My brother had worked at I called it a rich kids camp, because it was one East Coast camp there with about these 6 weeks they would stay at these camps, these kids. And my brother worked at that. He was getting his degree in Parks and Recreation. And so he had an assignment there to go to that camp. And so we picked him up, and then we came back across New York to Niagara Falls, back by Springfield, Illinois, where Lincoln was born. And then we came into St. Louis, or the Arch, and then came back home. So that was a 3-week trip, and it was just an exciting trip as an 11-year-old, experiencing things that I'd never seen, and it gave me a real spirit for adventure.
Yeah, and you're talking a 5,000 or 6,000 mile trip.
Wow!
Pulling a camper, pulling a camper, a non-air conditioned $600 camper that we would stay in most nights. I think we stayed 3 hotels during that trip, just because we were so worn out. We needed a couple of nights in a hotel.
Oh, that's so great. Well, that gives us some great perspective for, the foundation of all of this. So I want to talk about your career and the fact that you were very driven, even in your early days at DaySpring. But then you met Bob Buford,
Yes.
the amazing man who wrote the book Halftime.
Mm-hmm.
And, you spoke about that often, but you mentioned that your paths crossed, and that really had an impact on you. Tell us about that intersection and how it changed things in your life.
Yeah. Well, I was in a hurry to grow up. I remember, I was in a hurry to get my schooling, and even one reason I didn't go ahead and play college football is I didn't think I was going to play on Sundays, so I thought I'm going to go ahead and just get my education. And then I met a wonderful girl, and I went ahead and got married, and then I wanted to finish that, and I wanted to get a job, and I wanted to have kids, and I wanted to get my house. And I thought that was, the normal path for a person that was driven, and I was a believer. I loved the Lord. I prayed. And most of my life, even through my teens and 20s, was much more about my prayer life on asking God to help me. God, how do you, I've got all this list of things, Lord, I'm trying to accomplish for you, Lord. And how do I do that more effectively? And so when I would pray and God would answer that prayer, I'd be, yay, Lord. And when maybe he didn't answer that prayer, I'd be disappointed. And when I was 30 years old, I was invited to a conference. And I didn't know at the time, it was put on by Bob Buford. Bob had lost his son the previous year in a drowning accident down the Rio Grande. And that following year, Bob had asked many of his friends to invite the youngest, busiest Christian people they knew to come to a conference in Dallas, Texas. So we came to that conference, about 400 of us sit in that room, and Bob Buford gets up, and that's where I first met him, was this weekend at this conference. And he gets up and he basically says, are you driven or are you called? And he goes, this weekend is about helping you identify, what is really important in your life, because you guys are successful, you're believers, but are you really running for the right things and working for the right things? And I had to leave that conference and say, you know what, I was driven. I didn't really understand calling. I loved the Lord and wanted to do right things. But that was a pivot point for me over the coming years as I began to say, I asked that question, what is a calling? And that's what really made me pivot to say, I've got to spend energy and effort really understanding this calling of God.
But it also impacted your marriage and your kids too.
It did. It sure did. Well, it did, and it forced me to really say, okay, what does it really mean to slow down and to step back and say, is it all about activity? We're called human beings, not human doings, and the issue of activity. I'm still highly driven to achieve and to do those things, but I think they're a little bit better in perspective than they used to be. But that really encouraged me to slow down and say, I wanted to get out and see, the country again. And you can't experience things by just sitting at home, and you have to get out and see the adventure of what God is up to. And so I sort of set out that over the coming years, over the next 12 years, to say we want to get to as many national parks as we can. And we took 2 weeks every summer. And my brother-in-law and my sister and their 2 kids, we did this for over 12 years. And we're continuing to do it today, actually.
Wow.
And that's what we're going to hear a lot more about in the next segment. We're talking to James Barnett, president of DaySpring online, dayspring.com, about his brand new book, Blue Skies. We'll be right back with more on I Work for Him.
Want to build a profitable side hustle that impacts people with truth and healing in themselves and their leadership? Then look at becoming a certified leadership coach with Giant. Giant has been in the leadership space for over 13 years and has over 500 coaches in over 127 countries. Their coaches are being hired by Fortune 500 companies and organizations like I Work for Him. Jim and I took the Giant Sherpa training under one of these great coaches to become leaders worth following. Giant gives you everything you need to start your own coaching business from scratch, like hands-on training from top-level coaches, access to an all-in-one online platform to run your entire coaching business, and you get to join a thriving community of coaches around the world. To get started, Giant is hosting a coaching business workshop to help you learn how to build a successful coaching business. This workshop is 100% free, and you can reserve your spot by going to giant.tv/I Work for Him. If you're ready to impact people and get paid to do it, go to giant.tv/I Work for Him. That's giant.tv/I Work for Him.
Hey, welcome back to I Work for Him. Today we're talking, Martha, with James Barnett, president of DaySpring. you love DaySpring.
I do. I'm a big fan. I can be a big cheerleader for you guys. And I think that a lot of people may not even realize all that DaySpring has to offer. So I just want to encourage our listeners, go to dayspring.com and check it out for yourself. Become a regular, get the emails. You can shop for all of the things that you love and that are meaningful in gift giving and in your own life. And, we just are thrilled that we can be here on location with you, James, and just highlight a little bit of what DaySpring has to offer.
And I want to do a little plug, because on a She Works for Him podcast coming up, Martha does an interview with the person in charge of their Mary and Martha line. And Martha's got a sister named Mary. These two love this line, the Mary and Martha line. I just want to put dayspring.com. You can find out about Mary and Martha there. All right, James, you grew up with a passion to explore. When you and Marilyn had children, Nick, Abby, and Jordan, you decided to continue the Barnett passion for exploration, and you continue to take it to the next generation. How did you decide where to take them on a trip?
Well, we looked at the country and we said, we're going to get out to the national parks. And we picked the West first because it's wide open and it's a way we can get out and about. And we wanted to see the mountains and the oceans and the chasms of the Grand Canyon and with the things at Zion National Park and those kind of things. And so that really drove us to say, let's start planning these 2-week trips. We'd rent a van, a 15-passenger van, and we would...
so no more big Buick?
No more Buick. That's right. We couldn't have the big Buick. So we had a 15-passenger van, and so there were 9 of us on these first 5 or 6 trips. And then as you read my book, you'll find out that group began to get bigger and bigger. And there was a couple of times we had 22, 23, 24 people because family members and other people would come along on these trips with us. And it was a lot of fun. So we just began to do that. Every summer for 2 weeks we would go.
Right.
I just want to interject here. I know of several families right now that are doing national park tours, and I love this resurgence of interest in taking road trips with families. So I think, God's timing is divine. And I'm so excited that this might be something that they can kind of relate to as they learn more from your stories.
Well, one thing as I thought back when I was 30 and I was thinking back in my own childhood, I thought, what impacted me? And what did I remember? I call most of life is lived in the meantime. But it was that events when I was 4, some things when I was 7, some things when I was 11. In the years in between, I didn't remember. But I remembered those trips vividly. And I thought, if I can have that impact on my kids and that they can remember those vivid trips, and that if you interviewed them, they would tell you those were the markers that they look back on, and those were the experiences. And they weren't always easy experiences because we were,
traveling in a big Buick with 9 people.
That's right. I was told many people that, it's not always that exciting. You pile in a van, you drive for 12 or 14 hours, you park, you're trying to get some food, you're trying to get going, and you spend 4, 5, 6 miles hiking up a mountain, and you get to the top of the mountain and you go, wow, take it in. And I'd be with my kids, look at this is unbelievable, look at this. And then 20 minutes later, you're hiking back down, you're getting in that van, you're driving the next 3 hours, and you're going from place to place. But those mile markers, or those wow moments, I call them, help you see God at work. And that's what really encouraged me as I begin to take these trips. Every year, I just begin to think, wow, God, first of all, nothing is the same. You look at the Grand Canyon and you see one thing. You look at Zion National Park and the mountain and Angel's Landing and the Narrows, and you go to Yellowstone and Yosemite and the Tetons and the glaciers and Mount Rainier, and you look at, and there's nothing the same. And I remember looking again and saying, God, you're the most awesome God. You're amazing. You're always endless. He's endless in new things. And we did the East Coast. We covered a lot of the East Coast, Florida, all around, north, south, east, and west. Did a lot of Canada, a lot of the different areas around. But it was really this heart to see more. The more I saw, the more I wanted to see.
Well, let's talk about some of what you saw. I want to walk through some of your experiences that really impacted you, and then your leadership here at DaySpring because of what you learned. Let's just start off, and we're going to run out of time on this podcast, but you'll agree to stay on to do a 2-part podcast, won't you?
Sure, I'll be glad to.
Okay, so Wall Drug. And anybody listening to this podcast that's done any driving anywhere in the country knows about Wall Drug. It's in Wall, South Dakota, which is really not an impressive little community. No. but it intersected one of your early trips west with your family. It wasn't on the agenda, but the billboards for hundreds of miles, which literally, if you start off in New York City, you get on I-90, actually, it's out of Boston. You take I-90, you start seeing signs for Wall Drug 1,500 miles away.
Building the curiosity, aren't they?
So it made it a mandatory stop. But this stop transformed how you did trips. What did you see happen with your family and you as you were standing inside Wall Drug and watching your kids? And then how did what you learned at Wall Drug, how did that translate into impacting your leadership here at DaySpring?
Well, again, being a driven person and wanting to achieve, we had an agenda, right? We had this 2 weeks planned, down to
Martha knows nothing about that.
I was just going to say, I've never heard of anything like this before.
That's right. And had everything laid out, planned, and every day. And when we saw these signs driving across South Dakota, we said, well, we've really just got to stop there, and we're going to go to the Badlands first, and we got to get in, got into Mount Rushmore. We got a lot to cover. And so when we stayed, near there, and so we ended up going. And I remember this, of course, this was many years ago, but they ended up purchasing most of the downtown area. So you went from building to building to building and continued to go. But I remember seeing the excitement in my kids and my nephew and my nieces that were there with us, and just their excitement. And I was finally 3 days into the trip, and I was starting to slow down a little bit and get perspective. And I remember it hit me about, I'm trying to practice this thing of not only what is, God's call, but to slow down and be able to see God at work, to be that scripture, be still and know that I am God, just to be still. And I began to see things a little differently. I began to see the excitement in their eyes and having the fun they were having and picking things up they'd never seen. And there's that first time when you see someone experience something. And we were seeing these firsts that were happening over and over. And I remember just thinking, Lord, help me to slow down, because, Lord, you're at work all the time. You're doing things all the time. And it was just one of those moments that I remember thinking, wow, being still. And that's true in business. That's true here at DaySpring, is we're rushing along. Things are changing constantly. And yet we've got to slow down. We've got to look for where God is working and join him. And that really has helped me have that perspective. And that Wall Drug experience was just one of those aha moments that I remember just seeing that and thinking, wow, I just need to pause. Interruptions happen, and you've got to really stop and seize those moments and make sure we don't lose those.
And for you, it was an agenda item. For your kids, it was a place of wonder.
Yes,
and that's
place of wonder.
And not only the free water.
Yes,
you got
free water. They advertise that all through the
1,500 miles across the country. James, we're out of time for today's podcast, but you've agreed to stay on. We're talking with James Barnett, who wrote this great book, Blue Skies. It's really the story of his adventures with his family across the country, experiencing national parks, but also about how those experiences transformed his life and his leadership here at DaySpring online, dayspring.com. We'll be back with more next week on the podcast with James Barnett. Thank you, James, for being here today.
It's been wonderful. Thank you.
You've been listening to I Work for Him with your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg. We're Christ followers. Our workplace, it's our mission field, but ultimately,
I work for Him.
Did you know that God has a calling on your life? It's true. He's called you to bring Jesus to the world. For some, that may look like a pulpit or a foreign mission field, but for most of us, it looks like a construction site, a cubicle, a hospital, or a classroom. Wherever it is that you work, live, volunteer, and invest, that is your mission field. To learn more about integrating your faith into your work and retirement, check out our books, I Work for Him, She Works for Him, and I Retire for Him, by going to iworkforhim.com/bookstore.
Thank you for listening to the I Work for Him podcast with your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg. Please visit iworkforhim.com to learn more about connecting your faith and work, to join the I Work for Him Nation, or subscribe to our weekly blog. You can also follow us on social media at I Work for Him to stay up to date and meet our guests. If today's message spoke to you, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. Your review will launch more workplace missionaries across America. That's at I Work for Him and online, iworkforhim.com. I work the number 4him.com.